Yeah, hi, I'm Darren Kerby, and what we're here today is to share my knowledge and my journey on doing performance coaching. And we're actually going to get right into the psychology of things on how the brain makes the decisions for you to go forward or stop or fight or freeze or appease, whatever you'd like to call it. I was working in advertising and marketing for many years, and I enjoyed helping businesses. And what I actually found was there was a lot more about the advertising and marketing, and I really wanted to jump into that. So I did a business course, and then I was doing martial arts, so I did a course or diploma in coaching, and I started to put the two together. So I joined a global company that did business coaching, and I was really enjoying that. But what I actually found at the end of it, it wasn't about the business coaching, it was about developing the individual. So I studied for a little bit under a doctor in America, I call him Dr. G, on peak performance in sport, and I brought those principles over to business. So I've got away from the business a little bit, but still work a lot with business people. But what I've found, it's not so much about business, Trent, it's actually about developing the person. And I'm really enjoying that. I've got a son coming through now. He's doing sport, and I've been doing a little bit with developing him as well. So that's what I'm doing, peak performance for people, whether it's sport, business or life.
Okay, Darren, so tell us about your Kung Fu diploma in coaching.
Okay, so for now to instruct in martial arts, you need to do a diploma in coaching, and that way helps you get your insurances. And I was going along, I was coaching quite well with people or developing people, and I had a very good instructor, but I felt I needed to lift my level. So I really focused for many years on how to actually talk to people, give them triggers, little things that would spark thoughts to help improve them. So that was my journey, and then I moved that over to business.
And what are an example of some of those triggers?
Sure. I'll touch on this one very lightly. My wife actually came along to learn martial arts, and the first night she wasn't moving her feet, so I had a stick and I started tapping her on the foot. Now that was probably a little bit archaic, but it actually reminded her to move her feet. So that's what I'm calling a trigger to get a response for someone to get the action they want so they perform well.
And what's an example of something like that perhaps in the business world?
Okay, yeah, sure. So you have a business world, and I had a friend who was doing sales, and he found when he was actually selling to people, he was talking too much. So we sat down with him and said, Brian, every time you find yourself talking too much, he'd have a pen in his hand. So he'd actually remind himself he was talking too much, click the pen, and then ask a question, which gave him a bit of performance in selling. Yeah, so let's touch on the mental toughness with Alan Goldberg. He was talking about upskilling yourself in the process. Now we're going to switch over to 2008 at the Olympics in Beijing, and Michael Phelps was going for 8 gold medals, which was a record, and he'd spoken with his coach about how they could do that. So mental toughness is performing under pressure because you know you've got the skills, so you've got the confidence. So here's an example of it. Michael's going for 8 medals. The last medal was going to be the 200-metre butterfly. His coach, weeks before, was at training. He threw his goggles on the ground, stood on them, threw them to Michael, and he said, swim with those. And he did, and they leaked. And he said, we'll work out a way. Now, as it turns out, at the final of the butterfly in the 2008 Olympics, he's got 7 golds, he's going for the 8th. He gets in the water and his goggles leak. So here's mental toughness. He didn't panic, he was tough under pressure, he closed his eyes and counted his strokes, and he won by something like 200th of a second. Because under pressure, he was mentally tough and knew what to do and didn't panic, so the body didn't panic and go tight. So that's a great example. So even at Michael Phelps's level, practice those tough things under level and you build more character and mental strength, and that's what it's about, performing under pressure.
And that's where I guess elite teams, and this is the difference between perhaps some of the leagues around the world compared to the NBA, is to continue in basketball, is you train more than you play, so then the game is easy. You train for 3 or 4 hours on a Tuesday and Thursday, and then you've got a game that goes for 2 hours. Obviously, you're conditioned to do it. NBA, they play more games than they train, which is probably why the quality of the product fluctuates.
Yeah. So on that listening one, and we'll delve into the psychology of that shortly, but what I call it active listening. So if you're out in the business world talking to someone, we do listen, and as salespeople sometimes we start talking, but to actually follow on the conversation of what they're talking about, that's an art form, and it's actually sitting saying to yourself, I'm going to listen to them and I'm going to follow on with the conversation. Because as soon as we change the conversation, we can actually lose the person. If we're listening to them, they go, they're trusting me, so they've got more confidence in you. Yeah, so the pause, we get a lot of salespeople that talk really quick, and the more you say no, the quicker, the faster, and they start coming out with words, but not necessarily a good thing. Sometimes it's better to sit back, take that breath, acknowledge what the person has said, think about it yourself, and then the customer goes, they're listening to me, and then you get a positive result. Yeah, well, what I want to add to that, and you may not know this, but going back to around about 2014, many years ago, you were working at an electrical company, and I came in with my wife, and she wanted a washing machine. And the price was $1,800, and you came down a little bit, and we said, well, that's a good start. And you said, well, I can't go any deeper. And I said, well, okay, that's fine, but give us a year's supply of the washing stuff you put in with your clothes. And you came back with a big barrel, so you closed the sale for us because you listened to what we did. You may not remember that, but that's true.
Really?
You listened to us, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the sports psychologist you worked with earlier in America. Who was that, and can you explain some of the things you got out of that?
Yeah, sure. So his name's Dr. Alan Goldberg, and I reached out to him. And Alan does performance in sport. And I thought I knew what performance meant, but I really had no idea. He simplified it for me. And he talks a lot about where sport or business, and business is sport, you've got to have an outcome and you have to perform whatever you're doing. And he was talking about if you've got all the tools in you, you don't have to worry about the outcome. And you don't have to worry about the outcome before you start or during the process. So let's look at a sales scenario. Sometimes we're thinking, I can sell them this, or I can try this close, or maybe this price. We're taking our eye off the process. So Alan would say, get all the tools you need for selling and just focus on the process. Don't worry about the outcome. And if you do the process right, the outcome will look after itself. So here's an example, Trent. If we're looking at performance in salesmen. Now, a lot of salesmen are very good, but I'd like to challenge salespeople with this one, talking about the back of the brain and the front of the brain. If you put words that go to the back of the brain, you can close the person down with hormones known as cortisol. If you have words that put them in the front of the brain, thinking like, what sort of a car you're looking for, what do you need the car for, they start thinking, and of course they let off hormones like dopamine, serotonin and oxytocin, and those will actually help you close the sale. So energy, motivation and trust, they're the three products we might need to use in that scenario. But the problem is, as salesmen, do we actually do work to improve ourselves so our performance like that lifts? So as a salesman, think about, where could I improve? Maybe do a course on psychology, sports psychology. Just understand a little bit more how people think more, and that will lift your performance. And you'll actually focus more on the performance and not the outcome, and the customer will feel better too. So if we look at car salesmen, and they're not all bad, some of them are good, but I've seen it in car salesmen where someone will walk in and go, I want a red Ford. And they go, follow me. And they take you over to a yellow Holden. Straight away you've gone into a stress, fight sort of situation. But if they listen to you and say, look, we haven't got a such and such Ford, come with me and let's see what we can find. And that's opening up your thinking a little bit more. But when they sort of push you, and that's old term selling, that's when you start to go into that stress situation. Interesting with selling, Trent, we've been selling the same for over 100 years now. A guy called Stroud put together a format of selling back in the 1920s to help people who are maybe not educated but didn't have many skills, which you didn't back then, and they go out and they could sell insurance quickly on a little point form structure. And we still use that same point form now. But we're a bit more intelligent in the world now, so we need to start talking and thinking how people think, and we can do that by using the psychology of how the brain thinks. Yeah, so let's touch on the mental toughness with Alan Goldberg. He was talking about upskilling yourself in the process. Now we're going to switch over to 2008 at the Olympics in Beijing, and Michael Phelps was going for 8 gold medals, which was a record. And he'd spoken with his coach about how they could do that. So mental toughness is performing under pressure because you know you've got the skills, so you've got the confidence. So here's an example of it. Michael's going for 8 medals. The last medal was going to be the 200-metre butterfly. His coach, weeks before, was at training. He threw his goggles on the ground, stood on them, threw them to Michael, and he said, swim with those. And he did, and they leaked. And he said, well, work out a way. Now, as it turns out, at the final of the butterfly in the 2008 Olympics, he's got 7 golds, he's going for the 8th. He gets in the water and his goggles leak. So his mental toughness, he didn't panic, he was tough under pressure, he closed his eyes and counted his strokes, and he won by something like 200th of a second. Because under pressure, he was mentally tough and knew what to do and didn't panic, so the body didn't panic and go tight. So that's a great example. So even at Michael Phelps's level, practice those tough things under level and you build more character and mental strength. And that's what it's about, performing under pressure.
And that's where I guess elite teams, and this is the difference between perhaps some of the leagues around the world compared to the NBA, is to continue in basketball, is you train more than you play, so then the game is easy. You train for 3 or 4 hours on a Tuesday and Thursday, and then you've got a game that goes for 2 hours. Obviously, you're conditioned to do it. NBA, they play more games than they train, which is probably why the quality of the product fluctuates.
Yeah, so my journey in coaching, of moving into the performance, peak performance coaching, which I'm really enjoying, but it actually happened by accident. And a friend of mine rang me up and she said, Darren, my husband is in the local golf tournament and can you have a talk to him? And I said, well, I can, but I need him to call me. So week 1, he doesn't call me. Week 2, she rings me up and she goes, Darren, can you have a talk to him? And I said, you're going to have to get him to call me, you know. So we get to week 3, it's the last week of the Open. She goes, can you call him? I said, get him to call me, which is funny because the message between them wasn't being communicated, but that was that. So he rings me up on the Friday at 11:30. He goes, well, what are you going to tell me? So I said, Darren, how many strokes are you behind? And he said, 8. I said, well, 8 strokes behind going into the last round of the Heathcote Open. I think we've left things a little bit late. And so I said, tell me about what the problem is. And what we actually found out, he was overthinking it too much. He thought he was going to hit it too far. He was going to swing it too much. He was going to pull up. And all these things started to work on him. And there was one of the guys in the group was sledging him as well, but we won't go into that, but we helped him out with that. So he was actually thinking about the game and not doing what Goldberg might call as the process, had the mental toughness and the ability. So what we worked out was, I said, Darren, don't tell me what's going to happen. Tell me what you will do. What will you do? And we wrote will on his glove. We wrote will on every club and even will on the bag and even on the car window as he went there and it pulled it out. So what actually happened, the will pulled out his mental toughness and he started performing. And on the Saturday, I was sitting at home, I thought, I've got a good feeling about this. So I rang his wife and she said, yeah, 5 holes to go, we're 3 down. And I felt good. I thought, we'll keep in contact. So they actually drew, and then they had a playoff. And what happened in the playoff, the gentleman who was 8 strokes ahead, he started to tighten up and play bad. The other guy, well, he was just having a great day, and he won by a straight. So a great story. Did I have anything to do with it? Maybe, maybe not. I've got a friend who's in one of the universities in charge of psychology, and he said it could have been a bit of music on the way, but maybe we did. And he said what he actually found when he was out playing golf that day, he said it was like having a shotgun and shooting out lights. He was just putting the ball wherever he wanted to do it. So if you ever get caught, Will is our friend for peak performance. Hey, thank you for watching. My name's Darren Kerby and love focusing on peak performance in sport and coaching, and happy to talk to you whether it's about life, sport or business, because it all basically comes down the same. Basically what we're talking about is improving you, working on you and developing you. So if you've got something in your tummy you think, oh, I'm going along okay, but I need a little bit of work there, happy to have a chat with you, and happy to have that first chat always for free, because if we ever do any work together in a coaching scenario, you have to be comfortable with me and I've got to be comfortable with you. So we do what's called a discovery session for 15 to 20, 25 minutes, see if we're a fit for each other, and then we can go from there. So put some comments in the box below or reach out to me at Darren Kerby at my website, which is salesfox.com, and we can have a bit of a chat and get you performing to your peak.